Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. I'm your host, Bill DeFilippo, joined today by my co-host, Nick Pollock. Nick, how you doing?
I'm impressed at how quickly you have adapted to saying Roar Lions Roar instead of Roar Lions Radio, because in my head, as you were saying that, I was like, I definitely would have said radio.
Well, Nick, that's why I'm a professional. And by that, I mean, I hammered home after the last podcast. Hey, call it Roar Lions Roar now. Anyway, last podcast did not have this Matt. It had a different Matt. Matt Filipovitz is here. Matt, what's going on, buddy?
Bill, I'm good. It's a rainy day here, and I'm bummed that I missed the first episode, but I am so thrilled that we are back in podcast form, and I'm thrilled that I get to see you both. I saw Nick a little bit in 2020 when we did some videos, but Bill, I haven't seen you in a long time, a couple years probably.
Since everyone can see what Matt looks like here, I want to congratulate him for his the work that he's doing to win the starting quarterback job for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And on that note, today is the day we are going to break down Penn State's offense. If you're hearing this episode, we're starting with Penn State's quarterbacks. This is episode 1 of our offensive preview. We're doing offense, running backs, wide receiver, and tight end, and then offensive line. But first up, we're doing quarterbacks, Penn State's quarterback room. Maligned might be the right word to describe how it is. Sean Clifford decided to come back for his 6th year. Clifford last year, more than 3,100 yards passing, 61% completions, 21 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, was Penn State's 4th leading rusher with 163 yards and 2 scores. Behind him, Christian Veilleux, limited run, but at least in Penn State's game against Rutgers, he did impress. 16 for 26 for 238 yards, 3 touchdowns, and no interceptions for him on the year. The third quarterback from that room, Taquan Roberson, has since transferred to UConn, but Penn State did manage to bring in a pair of true freshman signal callers. Of course, all the hype is around Drew Allar from Medina, Ohio, a 5-star prospect, but there's also plenty of excitement around Beau Pribula, a 3-4-star prospect, depending where you're looking, from Central York High School in York, Pennsylvania. And Nick, when I think about this quarterback room, the big thing that jumps out to me is that, just as I think my general thought about the whole thing is that I don't know, I think Sean Clifford is a fine college quarterback. I don't think he's a guy who's going to get Penn State to a national championship or anything like that. But when I look at the other guys and I see their classifications on the roster are freshmen, redshirt freshmen, and freshmen, I am really happy Sean Clifford is here.
Yeah, it's weird because, everybody's really aware of Sean Clifford's, limitations at this point. We've seen as good as he can be, but we've also seen that, we've seen him for 4 years now. We know what he can do, we know what he can't do. So in that regard, you're right. It's really nice to have him back. It would be a really tough position to have a freshman, whether redshirt or otherwise, starting this year. I mean, as we've talked about, this kind of feels like maybe just a reset year for Penn State in general. So I guess in the grander scheme, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if this was the year they had to have a super young quarterback. But having Sean Clifford with the experience that he has in the office just affords you so much. It just gives you so much more wiggle room, so much more of a buffer while everybody else kind of figures out what they're doing on the offense. But you kind of touched on it briefly. I'm happy Sean Clifford's back, and that's a big part of this. But the quarterback room in general, I mean, this is probably, for lack of a better term, the healthiest the Penn State quarterback room has been in at least a couple of years. Especially because, obviously Drew Allar is the big name, but Christian Veilleux, we've seen enough of him to know that he's at least serviceable, and he's surely going to get better. And then Beau Pribula, in most cases, you would probably assume that he could be a transfer candidate at some point, and he still could be, but this is also a kid that grew up really wanting to go to Penn State and play for Penn State. So, probably has a better chance than somebody else in the same situation to stick around a little longer. So it's a really exciting room. And, Sean Clifford's not the most exciting guy, I guess. I'm pretty bullish on Clifford personally. I think he's going to have a great year, but I understand why others don't. But it's a really good situation they have themselves in right now.
Yeah, and Matt, over to you. I mean, when you look at this Penn State quarterback room, again, has 4 guys on scholarship who are in it, with one guy being very old and the rest of the guys being very young. What are just your general thoughts on what Penn State has going into the 2022 campaign?
Yeah, bringing Cliff back was important because these are young dudes, but I've often said on this podcast that change is very healthy in college football. And, Sean Clifford himself has experienced a lot of change, but I don't think his play has really elevated, since that original 2019 campaign under Ricky Ronnie. I think we saw what it could be in 21 under Mike Yurcich for those first 4.5 games, but actually it might have been 5. But even after, he got hurt, he spent a lot of time still in the lineup, but they kind of pulled the offense back. And then even after that month they had off ahead of the Outback Bowl, he didn't come back looking really any different than he did, in that Illinois game. So that makes me kind of concerned about really what he is. I do wonder if it was just kind of a scrambled mess for that month, trying to see who was even going to play, who was healthy, what is even your focus at that point? Is it just to get through the game? Is it really to improve your offense at that point? So I'm curious what he looks like going forward. And then behind him, Christian Veilleux, he's a big unknown, and that's a bad thing a lot of times, but we've seen more good from him than bad. This could be a case of, he played up in Canada. He was an unknown. He went down to the Bullis School in Maryland, playing good, high-quality football in a good league. And maybe he was undervalued. I don't know. It's hard to tell at this point by the recruiting sites
if I may, his not having a senior year due to COVID really, you could just tell that. I believe the quote from when he was at the Elite 11 camp heading into what would have been his senior year was something like, when it comes to just naturally throwing the football, he's there with everyone, but it's just the lack of refinement that comes from the weird path that he's taken. And of course he didn't get a chance to really do much of anything because his senior year of high school was taken away from COVID. But sorry about that. Go ahead.
Wait, real
no,
Flip,
you're good. And he was still ready.
Clifford took another step in the beginning of 2021.
He definitely took a step, but then he took it right back.
Okay.
If you know what I'm saying. He had those great first 5 games. He looked really good. He looked confident. The offense looked They couldn't run, but the offense looked pretty good passing the ball at least. And then they take a step back after he gets hurt. Understandable. And then I don't know the extent of his injuries, but he had a month off between Michigan State and the Outback Bowl. And do you think he looked fine in the Outback Bowl? Because I went back and I watched those highlights, and he never looked like the player he was before. I don't know if he wasn't fully healthy, but a month is a long, especially because he was playing the whole time. You have to imagine he wasn't, in a sling. He was just banged up. And then if you have that month to go back out there, he didn't look any better to me.
To me,
that's where I'm a little bit concerned.
To me, his issue with the issue in the Outback Bowl was really twofold. One, Penn State's offensive coaching staff, James Franklin, whomever it was, decided Penn State was not going to run the football in that game. Despite the fact that Kayvon Lee was having his best game of the season, he legitimately could have gotten 100 plus yards in that game if they just decided to ride him. They decided
that's not allowed.
Just going to. Yeah. Apologies. Nick, we'll talk about Nick Singleton next podcast, folks, but that might change. But it looked like they were saying, Sean, just go out there and this is your game. Play your game out here. And the issue that came with that was he didn't have his safety blanket. Jahan Dotson did not play in that game, and he just looked like a guy. And I think this is a good chance to dive into kind of our second bullet point here, which is just our level of confidence with Clifford. And the thing that concerns me about him, I think he's a good, steady hand. I have the numbers up on my computer. But with a 4,000-yard passing season and with 43 touchdowns, he would be the Big Ten's all-time leader in passing yards and passing touchdowns. Obviously, that has a gigantic asterisk. We'll talk about this off air, but it's actually a very funny list. Gigantic asterisk. He's going to be a 4-year starting quarterback, and those 4 years are going to be a redshirt sophomore, redshirt junior, redshirt senior, and redshirt super senior year. But despite that, we have seen Clifford take steps forward. Nick mentioned the Auburn game. There was the point that Bill Connolly made where he talked about before he got hurt. Clifford had a top 10 total QBR in the country, 85th. From that point on, he ended 47th nationally. My concern with Clifford is and continues to be that he just has a really nasty tendency to get caught up in this is something we talked about heading into last season. Get caught up in the chaos, get sped up, get all these things happen to him. And yes, there's obviously the fact that Penn State couldn't run the football last year. Yes, there is obviously the fact that outside of Jahan Dotson and Parker Washington, Penn State didn't really have a consistent, really confident, consistent third option in the passing game. Yes, there's the offensive line issues. Yes, there's all the stuff about how Yurcich was his third offensive coordinator in 3 years as a starting quarterback. But the thing that I think, and Nick, I want to hear your thoughts on this. The reason that, on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe I'm a 5.5 in terms of confidence on Clifford, maybe a 6, something like that, is the issues that we have seen with Sean Clifford over the years as Penn State's starting quarterback. Just the stuff between the ears are stuff like he's never been able to fix them, or maybe he has never been given the opportunity to fix them. But the fact that we are still talking about him the same way in terms of stuff he might be limited at, the same way we were talking about him heading into the 2020 season, I am a bit concerned about that. What say you?
I don't think that's unfair. I'm trying really hard to put myself back in the headspace of right after that Auburn game, right? Because I feel like I think we would all agree that was the player that he was those first
the best of Sean
those
Clifford.
first 5 weeks. That Sean Clifford, I think, is the guy that we would have seen all year if not for the injury. He did it against
You think he could have kept that up all season?
He did it against the two best defenses they saw. I don't see why.
Well, that's true.
Well, kind of. The Iowa game, he ended up getting hurt. He was able to move the ball on them, but also he threw 25 passes in a quarter and a half of football or whatever it was.
Right.
And he threw 2 interceptions with no touchdowns in that time. So I do think that's important to know, even though his total QBR in that game of 93 was his highest of the entire season.
And I will add the caveat.
Wow.
The caveat too, that the first interception against Iowa, clearly trying to throw the ball away and just got his legs swept out, and he lost all the strength on the throw.
Yeah.
And then the second one was just that deep ball kind of throwaway. But regardless, still bad throws. But yeah, I mean, I think your original point is fair. I think it's obvious, and it's the reason that Penn State isn't in the top 25 right now, right? Because there are still legitimate questions about Sean Clifford and what kind of his I think we all agree the physical tools are pretty good. He doesn't have he doesn't have an amazing deep ball, but he can get it out there. He's got great mobility when he's healthy. When he has the opportunity to, he can move around the pocket, all that stuff. His accuracy is good enough. But those same questions have always been, the mental side, not letting the game speed up on him. And to that point, the original thing I was saying, I thought that was improving. I thought we saw that improving at the start of 2021 because I feel like his decision making on, when to take off, when to hang in the pocket, I thought it was much improved from what we had seen previously. But then obviously after that, we saw an injured Sean Clifford, and that the injury kind of took away his ability to make the decisions, for better or worse, because he couldn't take off and run even if he had wanted to.
Yes.
But
Fair.
I would think that with the benefit of finally having the same offensive coordinator for a second season in a row should go a long way to helping clean up some of that mental side, just give a little more comfort in his decision making, all that jazz. But obviously, like you said, those are not questions that are necessarily fun to be asked at this point in his career.
Yeah, and Matt, heading over to you, just I think that if I am we'll say I'm a 5.5 on Clifford. We'll say Nick's about a 7. Is that fair, Nick?
Yeah, I might even go 7.5. Yeah.
Sure. What would you put that number out of 10?
Probably a 5.
Okay.
I want to say he definitely raises the floor of the team, but I don't know if he raises the ceiling. And as a 6th-year guy, that's what gives me my biggest amount of pause, in that if you're coming back for this 6th year, in theory, you have something to prove, and I really just don't know what there is to prove and how he's going to go about proving it after what we saw to close out the campaign. Like, I'm really trying to put a lot of stock into those first 5 games, but I just can't shake those last 6 or 7 out of my memory because he was definitely healthy enough to play. Like, the staff didn't put him in harm's way, if you want to put it that way.
Let's not say definitely.
Bit,
we all watched the Illinois game. That dude couldn't move.
That's true. That's true, but it's still part of like the overall Sean Clifford experience. And we've really just seen like a real Jekyll and Hyde throughout his 3 years. We've seen, I've said many times, I think 2019 was the best season under James Franklin, and he organized that. That was still, it was more run heavy than what it was before, but he still got the ball out there. He still fed, KJ Hamler, Jahan, Freiermuth. He still ran an offense with those weapons, and he was successful doing it. And he did it again for 5 games, but there's the whole what happened in 2020 and then what happened the last 7 of 21. So I have to just be, right in the middle of that 0 to 10 scale, I think, after seeing those 2 things. I think he can have a really strong season. Am I expecting, Kenny Pickett? No. Am I expecting like a pretty good version of Brock Purdy at Iowa State? I think that's reasonable, but what does that get you? So I do think you make a good point, Nick, with the second year in the offense. I think he'll have a much better command of it all, but, that's kind of assumed. So he really has to be a master of it to really take that next step and take the team, to a 10-win season, if that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned what he has to prove and how he gets there and all that. Like, obviously the bet, and, this might be a little unfair because, just how good he ended up being. But obviously the bet is that, he's a senior season like Kenny Pickett did, where Kenny Pickett was, I'm looking at his numbers right now. His first year as Pitt's starting quarterback, 12 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 58% completion. Second year, 13 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, 62%. Third year, 13, 9, 61%. Fourth year, 42, 7, 67%. He was the ACC Player of the Year. He was a Heisman finalist, first team All-American, parlayed that into a first round pick in the NFL draft. But
if you ask Pat Narduzzi, they still threw it too much.
Right, they threw it far too much. And listen, if Sean Clifford can, I'm not saying do that. I mean, if Sean Clifford do that, great. He can throw for 3,600 yards, which would be an improvement on what he did last year by about 500 yards. If he could throw for 30 touchdowns, which I believe would be a career high. It's either a career high or second. Yeah, it would be a career high. His career high is 23. So 30 touchdowns, 12 fewer than Pickett. If he could turn the ball over 7 times via interception, which is 7, 8, like that guy is a guy who can help Penn State get to, that Auburn game is a little less daunting. That Penn State game is a little less daunting. Purdue game is a little less daunting. If he's the guy that he's been this entire time, that's when you start getting into questions with him, Nick. And I'm not expecting a Kenny Pickett year out of him. I think that's just putting such high, and quite frankly, it's unreasonable to say my expectation is he's going to be able to do what the first team All-American quarterback and Heisman finalist did last year. But I think if he doesn't take a step towards that, that's a problem.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like for me, when I'm thinking about what I want to see from Sean Clifford this year, I don't really have any like statistical marks that I'm expecting him to hit or anything. I more just want to see, that it's actually a callback to like 2020. I remember saying that I thought, kind of low key that KJ Hamler leaving the offense was going to be a good thing for Clifford. Because we talked about how often that he would key on Hamler and just, when in doubt, just chuck it up to KJ. And we talked about how we thought that maybe his departure would lead to him, kind of forcing him into a position where he'd have to be a little more, thoughtful and spread the ball around a little bit more. That didn't happen because Jahan Dotson became the next dude. And Parker Washington or Mitchell Tinsley could very easily become that next dude this year. But this seems like the type of receiving core that should afford Clifford the chance to become a more complete, sorry, my dog is barking, a little more complete quarterback and just have and just
blitz. Calm down, brother.
I don't even know what he's barking at. But it should it should this is everything about the way the offense is set up right now. Should be the best offensive line in several years. Should be a much improved running game. A talented, and spread out wide receiver core. Theo Johnson and Brenton Strange another year in. Like, all the pieces are there for this to be a very good offense, and it's going to give Clifford a really good chance to show that he has the potential to be, I'm not going to say he's going to be drafted to be an NFL starter, but he could very easily latch onto a team somewhere as a backup to start at least. Like, this is his chance to do that. I just want to see him show command of the offense.
I'm inclined to agree. Matt, do you have any final things you want to add before I do the fun thing that is brand new and never before heard on this podcast?
No, I think we've kind of dissected Clifford as much as we have to. I mean, he's the guy. It's his show. I don't think anybody's going to push him. I just don't think anybody's ready. I do like the pieces behind him. I think Allar is going to benefit greatly from a year learning under a 4-year starter. So let's see what he has in his bag of tricks. I'm excited to see what he can do against a Purdue secondary in a couple weeks.
Yes, we will talk about Drew Allar and Penn State's backup quarterback room in a second. But first, we would like to introduce the pod's new sponsor, Home Field Apparel. If you are a college sports fan on the internet, you are surely aware of what Home Field Apparel is. But if you're not, Home Field is a premium collegiate apparel brand based out of Indianapolis. They're right in the heart of Big Ten country. They are keenly aware of how weird all of us at Penn State are, and that's important for a thing we will get to. Reason, but I own Home Field Apparel t-shirts. I own Home Field Apparel hoodies, crew necks, sweatpants. Basically, what Home Field makes, I make it a point to purchase. Everything they have is comfortable, it's unique, and they take the time to make sure that the things you get make you feel closer to your school. I've talked to some folks at Home Field about their process, how it works. They're looking through old yearbooks. They're looking through old newspapers. They're making sure that everything they put out has a special and unique tie to the school. And to me, that's really special. Matt, I know you are likewise a Home Field Apparel customer. I mean, even if they weren't about to do the thing that we're going to mention in a second, like I really am happy that I own several things from Home Field in my wardrobe.
Yeah, I own a few that I have no connection to. I have the Zot crew neck for UC Irvine. I'm very proud. I went to a bar one time and somebody started talking to me about the Anteaters, which was really fun. I own Sad Jonathan, the Husky shirt, which I think I wore that like going out with a wedding party in Oklahoma this summer, which in hindsight was probably wildly inappropriate, but really funny. And I own a Louisville basketball one, and I've never even been to Kentucky, but it's a cool shirt, and I'm a big fan of all their stuff. I think, yeah, like you said, Bill, they have some pretty cool stuff coming down the pipeline here.
Yeah, I made my last purchase through them was a pair of their sweatpants that they made when St. Peter's as a 15 seed made it to the Final Four, and they are now my new favorite pair of sweatpants. And right now they are in the midst of their annual event launching new schools. It's called Big Saturday, and this week Home Field announced that Penn State is its newest school. It's going to be a collection with 15 pieces of apparel. It launches at noon on August 13th. And if you are a new customer, you can use the promo code ROARLIONSROAR, all uppercase, and you'll get 15% off your first order. Again, new customers, promo code ROARLIONSROAR, all uppercase, 15% off your first order. And as an added bonus, they track their sales. They make it a little bit of a competition. Right now, number one biggest first day in Home Field history is the University of Florida, and they think that Penn State can challenge that. Let's make it a point to go out there and let's beat Florida because the last time Penn State and Florida played in football, Matt McGoing threw 5 interceptions and the Nittany Lions lost the Outback Bowl. So remember, promo code ROARLIONSROAR. He threw 5 picks in that game. Go back and watch
Gary
it.
Nova.
It's not fun. That's right. I heard about Gary Nova. One last time, promo code ROARLIONSROAR. You'll get 15% off of your first order if you are a new customer. Let's get back to the podcast and let's move on to the guys who aren't Sean Clifford. Your preferred backup, Nick, in this Penn State quarterback ecosphere if Sean Clifford gets hurt, if the season kind of goes off the rails a bit. Who do you want to see be the guy who comes in and is splitting Clifford for a series, a quarter, a half, or potentially longer than that?
Yeah, so the first guy off the bench this year should 100% be Christian Veilleux. Not that I don't love the potential of Drew Allar and Beau Pribula. I really do. I think both of them have a chance to be really fantastic quarterbacks. But Christian Veilleux has been here. He's been here for the full year now. We saw him do a pretty decent job once he was not the first man in line in the Iowa game. The coaching staff was very clear that they didn't think he was ready at that point. And later in the year, he finally did become ready. And the results, I think, were pretty good. I mean, his overall numbers are a little inflated considering 67 of his passing yards came on a wide open pass to Malik Mega against Rutgers. But overall, he didn't look flustered. Like, he didn't look out of place. He looked like he understood what he was supposed to be doing. So if if Clifford needs to come out for a series or something like that, I think it has to be Veilleux. Now, if Clifford were to suffer some sort of, God forbid, some sort of season-ending injury like that, then I think you start to maybe consider working in one of the true freshmen instead, because, I think Veilleux has a great future as well, but I think it's pretty clear that Allar or Pribula is going to be the quarterback of the future, most likely Drew Allar. So I think if it's a long-term thing and you know that Clifford's not coming back, then I think you maybe start to consider Drew Allar instead and just kind of let him take his lumps, let him learn the game at the college level on the fly, all that stuff. But I think if it's just a short-term thing, I think it has to be Christian Veilleux.
Yeah, worth mentioning the reason that Veilleux didn't, for my money, the reason that Veilleux didn't come in earlier in the season when Penn State needed a backup quarterback was I'm not convinced that Penn State's game against Iowa would have looked any different if Christian Veilleux was in there against Taquan Rovers. And I think that was just throwing someone into a horn nest. And then, of course, the exact opposite of a tense game against Iowa is a November noon kick against Rutgers at home. So I think that's probably where, I think there's a lot of, why still this day, why didn't you come in against Iowa? I basically think that's it, but neither here nor there. Matt, same question to you. Preferred backup in the event that someone has to come in for Sean Clifford?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's got to be CV. If you think about it, Valeri is the last true freshman Penn State quarterback to throw a pass since Christian Hackenberg. I think that's accurate, and he did that despite not playing football in 2020. I mean, Levis didn't play in 18. He only got in 19 as a redshirt freshman. Cliff got in as a redshirt freshman against Pitt in 18. And then it was McSorley for forever. So I think it's been almost a decade. So Vayer is in, kind of uncharted waters at that point. The redshirt rule didn't exist really before that. So I'm not comparing him to Christian Hackenberg because I wouldn't wish that on anybody. But that says a lot about where the staff thinks he's at and what he can be. I think he's better than his recruit ranking made him out to be. And, only, 3 games into his career that he actually played, that's really all we're still going off of. So I think it's got to be him. I think the other two guys are at least a year away from seeing any kind of meaningful snaps, barring injury.
Yeah, I mean, I basically agree. Well, I basically agree with Nick, but I think the important thing is that if they're in practice every single day and they determine that Drew out, as much as I respect Beau Pabula and I want him to stick around and I want him to be Penn State's Stetson Bennett for all intents and purposes, I think if they're looking in practice every day and they decide that Drew Allar is just not ready, he's just not going to be ready, whatever that might look like, I don't want to see him this year. I want him to use this year to get himself to a place where you're maximizing the likelihood that his time in Happy Valley as the quarterback recruit that Penn State has been looking for forever, especially in the playoff era, that when he steps onto the field, he is ready to help Penn State build towards a national championship contender. If that means never plays this year. I know there are some people, and there is definitely some merit to this, who believe that the best thing for someone is experience. The best way to learn about college football is to play college football. Then throw him in there and let him go. If that is not the case, if he is not 110% ready, physically, mentally, whatever it might be, to be able to contribute to Penn State winning football games this year, I don't think Penn State, going down the stretch under any circumstances, should pivot to focusing on the 2023 season. So if that means your best option to win games this year is Drew Allar, put Drew Allar in. But having said that, I am inclined to believe it is going to be Christian Veilleux the entire time. And this is why having Sean Clifford back is so big, because I am a fan of Veilleux's game. I don't want him to be in a situation where he would have to be Penn State's guy. If Sean Clifford left, you have to think that Penn State would have been very active in trying to get someone in the transfer market. That fortunately didn't end up happening. This lets you bring Veilleux along a little bit more, lets you bring Allar along a little bit more slowly, just all that. And I think that's such a big thing for this QB room. But having said that, I think it's going to be Veilleux. Blowouts, candidly, blowouts in either direction, as I think of my local college football team. If Clifford ends up picking up a knock and he goes down, just all those circumstances, it seems to be Christian Veilleux's job to lose, which leads to our final question before we end this episode of the pod. And Matt, I'll start with you. Just broadly, do you think we should do our play competitive snaps this year under any circumstances?
Yes, I do. Honestly, I do. I think November's pretty light. I don't want to count anybody out in August yet because everybody's optimistic in August. But, I mean, the meat of your schedule is coming, with this Auburn trip, the Purdue trip, and then you get Michigan and Ohio State in October, as well as Minnesota, one of the better teams. I think if there's going to be room available, it's going to be in November, because I think that's when a true freshman can be ready. Later in the year, like you just said about CV, the reason he didn't go in October, because he probably wasn't ready yet. He was still probably getting that offense down. So I think November is a realistic timeline. If they're blowing somebody out, whether that be Maryland, Rutgers, I think Northwestern's in there, and who knows? It's an even year, so who knows if Northwestern's going to be good. But that's definitely an option. So, and then real quick, one thing I do want to say about Pribula before, I acquiesce my time. I said before, Penn State needs the 3-star. They need the 3-star guy who loves the program and is going to be an option in a pinch. And I think that's Pribula's floor. He's a guy who, if somebody gets hurt, can come in and hold things down for a couple of games. And that's his absolute floor. I think that there is so much value in having a guy on your roster who loves the program, grew up rooting for the program, and is just going to know his role and play his role. So to have that guy, and it's not going to be this year because thankfully you can redshirt him, but to have the guy, maybe in 2023, 2024, if, dudes get hurt, you have the guy who's learning the offense, who's taken the reps, who probably won't transfer, but who knows in this new era, but there's value in that 3-star. So I'm excited about the room as a whole, and I think the floor is much higher than it was last year.
Completely agree. And Nick, final word here from you. Do you think we see Drew Allar play for Penn State this year?
Yes, I agree with everything that Flip said. The only caveat I will add is that I don't think it necessarily has to be Drew Allar. I think if Beau Pribula is putting himself ahead in practice, I think we could see Pribula instead of Allar in those same snaps. Okay. But otherwise, yeah, totally agree. I think that any opportunity that the staff gets to get whichever one of those young kids time actually on the field against live competition, I think they'll take it.
Yeah, that seems totally fair. And I think that's going to be it for this edition of the podcast. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Make sure you subscribe wherever you go to get your podcast. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, use the promo code ROARLIONSROAR, all updates if you are a new customer for Home Field Apparel for 15% off of your first order. Last time, thank you very much for listening to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. For Nick Polak, Matt Filipovitz, I'm Bill DeFilippo. Take care, everyone.